I have expressed multiple times that Goodnight Punpun is my favorite manga ever. I mean, just look at the channel. My character has a lot of similarities to Punpun, and most of my old profile pictures were of him. Now, not only is it my favorite manga of all time, but as of right now, it's also my favorite story ever. I have it above every other thing that I've ever watched or read or played. I think it's a fantastic series. It has a very great cast of characters, some beautiful art, and many moments where I can personally relate to the story and its characters. Punpun is a very real story. As goofy as some of the characters can look or be, I mean, look at the main character, they can equally be awful, disgusting, and irrational. The characters feel a lot like real human beings with real problems. And though the author mostly seems to show the negative aspects of humanity in this, I love the way Inio Asano shows that in the story. And so today I want to talk about the moment that pretty much solidified Goodnight Punpun as one of, if not my favorite story ever, and some of the crazy things that happened afterwards, which only strengthened how I felt about the story. Throughout the story of Goodnight Punpun, the main character is dealt a bad hand since the very beginning. Every step he takes forward, he is pushed back by some negative force, whether it be the dysfunction of his home life, school life, anything, really. Punpun is forced to go through such awful, traumatic experiences, both physically and psychologically, that no kid and no person should ever have to go through, which messes him up, to say the least. His perception of many things warped as he ages. Punpun's perception of love or genuine intimacy being one that I remember more than anything in the story, especially when he reconnects with his childhood love, Aiko. After reconnecting, they basically start a relationship, one of the most toxic and abusive I have seen in all of manga. They make the decision of living together and going to Kagoshima, which was basically this dream/promise they made to each other as kids, something from the past that negatively affects their current relationship. Punpun goes with Aiko to her mother's house, Aiko's mom also just not being a good person like usual. Things eventually escalate as Aiko's mother belittles her in front of Punpun, like insulting her or mocking Aiko over stuff that happened in her childhood. She tries to guilt trip Aiko before Aiko stands up and basically says she doesn't need her family anymore and plans to walk off. But Aiko's mother pulls out a knife, attacking her, and even stabbing Aiko in her side. Punpun stares blankly, in shock as the situation unfolds, silent and in the corner, before Punpun's version of God appears. God in this story being pretty much Punpun's subconscious, or that little voice in the back of your head. The tension in the air is thick. I think I've been waiting for this moment, says God, before we are given one of my favorite lines in panels in anything I've ever read. The line that cemented Goodnight Punpun as my favorite. Good morning, Punpun. Punpun tackles Aiko's mother and, in a fit of rage, just beats her up. Aiko's mother tries to fight back, but Punpun overpowers her, strangling her with as much force as possible, saying nothing but a single word. Die. Punpun takes the life of Aiko's mother, at least that's what he thinks. Technically, Aiko was the one who finished the job, but Punpun wasn't aware of that. Good morning, Punpun is such a simple, short line, yet to me it has so much importance for Punpun as a person. I'm not sure what the general opinion on this scene is, but personally I see it as Punpun fully letting loose, fully succumbing to his negative and violent thoughts after not really doing that for so long. As if finally waking up and defending someone who he thinks he loves. He stands up, turning to Aiko as he reassures her by saying, "It's okay now." And we see Punpun's face, unlike anything we have seen in the series. Punpun's face always changes based on how he's doing mentally and stuff, but what I love most about this is how empty it feels. Throughout the whole story, Punpun is mostly his bird-like self. It's rare he's given a look that is the complete opposite or that's even human until the later arcs. We got that eye form for a bit, and this human body/bird head look from when he was imitating his neighbor or whatever, but this was different. It's my favorite design in the series due to how simple yet effective it is. I love how it still has the core elements of Punpun's design, that being the shape of his head and the nose, but I love how the other half is so non-Punpun looking. The human features which we have seen before, the fact he has no eyes, his face and neck covered in darkness, and obviously the giant bull horns on his head. Bull horns, not satanic demon stuff. But the reason I love that part of his design is because it actually relates to Punpun's star sign, the cowherd star. It's a good bit of symbolism and has clearly been a huge inspiration for my avatar. Now, this obviously isn't the first time Punpun did something bad without thinking, but this is probably the most surprising and intense impulse he's acted on that I personally remember. This entire scene was a shock to read, and I think it's my favorite moment because of just how insane it is and how everything afterwards only seems to spiral down and get worse. Punpun and Aito's trip to Kagoshima really proving that, in my opinion. At this point, the two are so riddled with trauma and their own issues that, well, specifically Punpun is just fully unhinged with his words and actions. Their relationship also worsening with each chapter, Punpun almost killing a guy for littering. They clearly are not well. It's incredibly sad reading it. There's even a moment where Punpun seemingly reverts to his old self, saying that he's happy as he plays in the sand with Aito. This is actually one of my favorite moments in the whole series, just, due to the art being so incredible. But obviously, things don't stay that way, as things only seem to escalate and worsen with each chapter. All the way until Punpun and Aito decide to look for her uncle, since he's a doctor and Aito's condition has worsened from when she was stabbed. Sadly, he isn't around, so they find a place to stop and rest. They talk about their past, their childhood, and how Aito even wished she would fall in love with Punpun as a child, before they eventually both fall asleep. July 1st, 2 p.m. Punpun wakes up realizing Aito is gone. All that was left was her hat. Punpun gets up and walks around before finding Aito lifeless and hanging from the ceiling. This moment was a big shock when reading. Punpun takes her down from the ceiling, lifting her over his shoulders and walking. But to make a long story short, we skip to July 7th. Punpun is back in the city feeling just fine. He returns to the abandoned factory he visited back when he was a small, timid boy, arguing with God, or his inner self, telling it to die, as he stabs himself in the eye where God stays. With no Aito or God, Punpun could finally rest. He should finally close his eyes and deeply sleep. But he is then stopped by Sachi and brought to the hospital. Punpun is then suspected as a murderer and interrogated by the police, and is eventually put on probation for the situation with Aito's mother. As time passes, he now works as a real estate agent, but says that his current life is like being a ghost. He runs into an old elementary school friend, along with Sachi, her child, and the others. And after they converse for a while, Punpun waves goodbye, looking like his old self again. And this is the last time we see Punpun ever. A simple bird-like design with tears in his eyes. But even though Punpun doesn't look like his dark, angry self, we know that Punpun will probably never live peacefully again. That trauma, guilt, the memories of everything, specifically Aito, will be something he'll never forget. Punpun will suffer for the rest of his life because he survived. This is also something I mentioned in my first Punpun video because Inio Asano believes that living is harder than dying and states that this was the worst possible outcome for Punpun. But sadly, that isn't exactly how the story ends. It doesn't really get to end in a satisfying or clean way, as we see that the cycle is never ending and will inevitably continue, though I might touch deeper on that in a future video. I'm not sure if I really want to revisit parts of this story again. Goodnight Punpun from chapter 112 all the way to the end was what made it my favorite series. It is some of the most shocking, vile, depressing, yet greatly written content I've read in manga. Things get insane the more it progresses before culminating in a kind of open ending that I think fits really well for this story. Goodnight Punpun is, in my opinion, probably the greatest depiction of mental health, trauma, and all that bad stuff that I have personally read. Punpun is a boy who's robbed of his innocence, eventually spiraling down into something awful. Aiko is a girl who was basically in the same boat, and both of them reuniting together when they're adults. It's sad. It's a very, very sad story. But, it's phenomenally written, in my opinion. If you want to see more about what I mentioned before, though, I highly recommend Inio Asano's interview with Manga Brog. Not only was it a massive inspiration for all 3 of my Punpun videos, it's also just a great article if you want to understand more about the series and its brilliant and depressing author. If you have any Punpun related comments, please toss them down below, and remember to subscribe, hit the notifications, and check out my other socials for more updates. Dear God, Tinkle Hoy, or whatever Punpun says, and yeah, thank you for watching.
It ain't hard to tell. excel, then prevail. The mic is contacted, I attract clientele. My mic check is life or death, breathing a sniper's breath. I exhale the yellow smoke of Buddha through righteous steps. Deep like the shining, sparkle like a diamond. Sneaker Uzi on the Allen, and my army jacket lining hit the earth like a comet invasion. Nazis like the Afro-situation, half man, half amazing. Cause in my physical I can express through song, delete stress like motion.